This is a story about a very special boy who found himself at the end of the world. But our story doesn't begin here. We have to go back. Your humble narrator began a journey of her own with her own special little boy. And that's why she's been absent. It only makes sense to return with one of my favorite stories, Sweet Tooth, a post-apocalyptic story about a little deer boy named Gus, his chosen guardian big man, and his found family. I touched on Sweet Tooth in my episode about the costuming in The Last of Us. The costumes in this show do such an excellent job of helping with the story and making the world look lived in. Every time I rewatch it, I notice something new. With all the amazing stories being shelved before they can be concluded, I'm so happy that they filmed seasons 2 and 3 back to back to ensure a proper finale in this 3-part arc. Now let's get into what makes costumes such an integral part of building this world. Sweet Tooth deals with the population decimating biological event called the crumble that results in only about 2% of the population surviving.
What's it like out there? It sucks.
There are sections of the country that have infrastructure, power, and access to working things from before the crumble. While these pockets have nicer things, they're still obviously worn, not brand new. These folks in places like this cul-de-sac aren't really allowed to leave, so they can live in their suburban fantasy while things are brought to them and they take care of them to the best of their abilities. Aditya Singh, one of our villains, and his wife Ronnie start out looking like normal suburban keeping up with the Joneses types. They're captured and transported to a zoo by the main villain of seasons 1 and 2, General Abbott. Ronnie starts wearing clothing found in the zoo gift shop, whereas Adi doesn't change his until he's told to. Dr. Singh just looks like a haggard man by the end of the series. He doesn't appear to wash his clothing and he barely grooms. Early in the first season, he's wearing a gray sweater with leather elbow patches. The next time we see him, he's wearing an almost identical gray sweater, which he then wears until the middle of season 2. The only reason he changes his clothes is because Abbott left clean clothes out for him to wear to a dinner with him and Ronnie, and later when he does a presentation in front of the other leaders. He doesn't even seem to bathe. It's pretty gross. It definitely shows that he's got a one-track mind in trying to find a cure, a thing that goes from something to save the woman he loves to his own ego and inability to let go. Ronnie, on the other hand, is sick and has multiple clothing changes. Even though she looks tired and sick, she's trying her best to take care of herself given the circumstances. Even if she isn't dressing up to look nice anymore, she's still going through the motions of normalcy. Then there are folks like our main character, Gus, and his Pubba, who are completely cut off from society, so they have finite resources. You see, while Gus is growing, Pubba splices sweaters together as he gets bigger. The way he mends and makes things for Gus also appear to improve with practice. Then when Pubba dies, Gus wears Pubba's clothes rolled up. While on the road, Gus rarely changes his clothes. He wears blue jeans, a brown puffer vest, and a red flannel shirt. In the final season, he's still little because he's a kid, but the clothes fit better, and Wendy is wearing his vest. The visual shorthand to show his growth and let you know time is passing is perfect and thoughtful. Parts of this show make me think of different modern fairy tales like The Little Prince and Where the Wild Things Are. In the final season, Gus is given a yellow scarf and later meets a little fox girl named Nuka. The show falls into the science fiction genre, but it also definitely has magic and fairy tale elements. Big Man, Tommy Jeopard, meets Gus by chance. He starts out looking gruff and unapproachable in his huge leather jacket, and as the show progresses, he gets softer and more dad-like in his hoodies and sweaters. He had the chance to be a father before the crumble, and his doubts made him lose his family. He wears the visage of the last men until he goes fully dad mode. He goes from wearing a lot of dark colors like burgundy and dark brown and starts wearing bright tans and yellows near the end. One of my very favorite scenes is when Gus and Big Man end up at a resort housing a small family of 2 adults and a kid. Their clothing is really nice, very fresh, and super clean. It makes sense that 3 people living in a mountain resort with a gift shop full of clothing over the course of 8 to 10 years would have access to such nice things. The way they look is very different from Theo's family in season 3. It's a lot more like that dad scavenges for things when he takes trips in his plane or with his multiple vehicles. I'll get back to Theo later. Amy, another self-imposed guardian, and Wendy, a sweet little hybrid girl. The zoo, dubbed the Preserve by Amy, becomes a safe home for more hybrid children. The two of them go on supply trips together, so Wendy has clothes that fit her as she grows. I assume that since they're trying to stay hidden, she wears a lot of the same things over and over again. They also supplement their clothing with stuff from the zoo gift shop like t-shirts and the polka dot bandanas. The hybrid kids dress like kids. It definitely feels like they're dressing themselves with stuff they have access to, and you can tell which kids had people that took care of them before delivering them to Amy. Amy loved all of her kids and definitely kept them dressed with care. All the garments have been modified to account for things like tails and wings, things that are easy to get in and out of themselves. Repairs have been made where needed. They don't have a wardrobe, just ready to care for items that fit right and account for their needs. One of my favorite scenes with Wendy is when she's getting Bobby ready to go to the store and she's playing dress up with him and he gets annoyed with her and sachets away. There are a lot of sweaters throughout the show, which is something I always love to see in post-apocalyptic media. I plan on talking about this a little more in an upcoming video, but it makes sense to repurpose fibers into something else, or have something easily mended like a sweater. The gang meets Theo in season 3. He's a little superhero in his own right with a secret lair full of art and hero things. He wears a mask and a cape over his overalls, and he's obsessed with keeping his family and pet rooster safe. It turns out he's actually a hybrid kid who's keeping his appendages a secret. This scene with him removing his binder reminds me of learning about intersex kids in the 90s when I grew up, and how doctors would make the decision for the kids before they could make a choice for themselves. Part of this I learned in middle school biology, and part of it I learned from watching daytime talk shows. I know things are quite a bit different now, but the dad appears to be close to my age, so I think maybe he had the same kind of education or the same access to those types of people, and that made him afraid. He's making his decision for his kid because he's scared of the way the world will view him, and that seems really backwards, which is what people were like back then. I do want to take this moment to say that there's a reference to a parent wanting to perform what they view as corrective surgery, so if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, I just want this to be a content warning if you decide to watch this show. They don't do it, but they do discuss the possibility of it. Theo also just really struggles with who he actually is versus who his dad wants him to be, and what his dad thinks society will see him as, which could also be seen as struggles for gender non-conforming kids and their families. When we see him on the roof without his costume, without his binder, free and learning to fly, he looks so much happier. Sure, the world is scary, but he can be himself here. Rosie Zhang, daughter of warlord Helen Zhang, had 4 hybrid sons, and they broke my heart. The first time we see them, they're just little baby puppies curled up in a bed wearing little onesies, clearly loved because they're her children. This reminds me of when people put pit bulls in onesies to make people feel safer around them, reminding them they're just puppies. The next time we see the little boys, they're wearing torn up clothes and muzzles. It's probably one of the hardest things in watching the entire show for me. The special effects used to make the animal children seem real definitely does its job, so seeing these poor little boys not dressed up like sweet little boys, it's pretty tough. It actually evoked the emotion I'm sure I would have felt if they had done this part properly in the Hunger Games.
Thank you for your consideration.
Before Big Man really starts caring about Gus, he starts making good decisions against his will, and one of them is dressing Gus up like a kid who thinks hybrids are cool. I love this look so much because it definitely looks like something a kid would put together himself, just like the other kids at the train station market. The people who wear some semblance of a uniform all have visual markers that lump them together. The last men have their scars and piecemeal fatigues. Abbott's men have military uniforms with the specific pink. Fascists sure do like their branding. The animal army members each choose an animal and dress accordingly. Dolly's people all look like airplane mechanics with a slightly anachronistic spin to them. General Abbott runs the Last Men, an army of adult human survivors in military-style uniforms. His immediate circle seems to have more tidy and organized uniforms. They wear his cranberry red, kiwi green, and bright watermelon fuchsia along the regular green fatigues. His brother Johnny, one of my favorite characters that I wish was on screen more, adheres to the uniform pretty well, while still having a little bit of individuality with his glasses and hair. Batista, a soldier who appears to be Abbott's right hand, is very clean, polished, and rigid. She stands out from the rest of them because she is conventionally attractive but isn't dressed like someone in other media who would look like her. It shows that somebody who looks like a model would still exist in the apocalypse and that they would need to be a part of society in some way. She just so happens to be pretty, but she's doing the same job as everyone else, and even more so. Her uniform is pressed and she seems to be very strict in following the rules. She reminds me of cheerleaders I know who ended up in the Marines. The coat Abbott wears when meeting the three is so beautiful, and it's one of my favorite things because you know somebody like him who insists on pomp and circumstance had it specially made. It shows that there is this ability to have things manufactured in this world. Just because the internet is down doesn't mean all resources and means of manufacturing are down. Not everything is scavenged. You can see this by looking at the three and their cohort. The three are leaders who essentially run everything of import. Dutch and his crew from the lowlands look kind of weird west, and all of them are wearing bandanas to match this particular aesthetic, but also to protect their faces from the sick. Voss and his followers are very woo-woo, culty hippie types who worship the hybrids as an alien race called the Centauri. They all have very long and unkempt hair and wear long robes which look like they're made out of homespun fabrics. Helen Zhang and her folks look like stereotypical rich Texan cowboy oil tycoons. From the bolo ties to the huge hair and cowboy hats, you can tell they all belong together. They wear a lot of wool and leather, which makes sense with their available resources. Her daughters are as fashionable and put together as she is, from their perfectly coiffed hair to their pristine makeup, especially her pregnant daughter. Helen is terrifying. She is perfectly put together in every single scene. It makes sense that the Zhang crew didn't dress well for the weather, but I wish there had been some symptoms of frostbite or cold on them to show the fact that they were dressed like idiots in Alaska. This is more of a makeup issue than a costume issue. The way they dress definitely speaks of people who come from money and power, but also cosplay assault of the earth types. Zhang wearing her fur definitely made sense because that's big Texas energy, but also it shows how much she hates the animal children. Showing her disdain for the hybrids by wearing fur is so tacky and cruel, which was a great touch. Her fate was pretty satisfying, and it couldn't have happened to a better monster. The animal army consists of teenagers who have pledged their lives to protecting hybrids at all costs. They have each taken an animal icon to style themselves after. The leader, Bear, started the animal army as a way to find her long-lost baby sister, who we eventually find out is Wendy. Her right hand is a girl who styles herself after a tiger, and there are all kinds of other animals as well, but my favorite is the blue jay with his jinkos. Look at them!
I feel like I went to art school with that kid.
Oh, so that's so cool. And you know, that was an endangered Colorado bluebird, I think, that we referenced. So, because of course, we did look at so many, and I wanted to kind of pick not an extinct bird, but an endangered bird. So the and the denim, and it was like, that's a lot of work, but
That was awesome.
we did it. It was so great, and now like all that denim stuff is so.
It's very 90s, and I graduated in 99, and so it just reminded me of like at least 3 kids I went to arts high with.
That's
I was
so
like, I
cool.
love this. It's so it doesn't look like he was dressed by an adult. It looks like these kids were like, go make your own costumes.
Yeah, go make your own costumes. That's exactly right.
They all have a bunch of non-clothing items put together to make their costumes, like sleeping bags and paper mache. Bear, or her government name, Becky, dresses in high school indie punk art club style, wearing a torn-up vest made of an overly large denim jacket and a t-shirt with written words, "No Man's Land." This reminds me a lot of Tank Girl. In the final season, the clothing worn by the people on the HMS Simpson, the crew investigating the spot where the sick originates, makes sense. It was warm weather clothing of the era that it's supposed to indicate. Sweaters and flannels and skins from the locals. People in the present day don't seem to dress warm when they're in buildings, but they do dress warm outside. Nuka, Sienna, and Birdie, Gus's mom, definitely did. It's surprising that the townfolk don't wear more layers outside or hats to cover their faces, but they're probably used to the weather. I live in Minnesota and it's awful in the winter. You never really get fully used to the cold in a way that wouldn't be dangerous if you just kind of wore what you would wear for warm weather. So I can't imagine how cold it is on a day with 18 hours of darkness. I know that people need to get paid if their faces are shown, but like they could have at least put on a scarf and maybe pulled it down or something. The post-crumble world is a bit smaller, but it does still exist. There are fewer people and they still need clothes. There are definitely people who dress for survival, and there are people who have a bit of personality with what they wear. It's been about 10 years. There are always going to be people fighting for survival and control, but more than anything else, they're going to be people trying their best to thrive. Whether that be through making a home, finding a family, or trying to build things back, all of those things are present in different ways. When we see the characters in Sweet Tooth grow and change and thrive, seeing those changes through the clothing they make or even how they fall apart, it makes sense. Jep goes from child hunting soldier to a warm yellow wearing dad. Zhang devolves from a well-manicured leader to a nobody lost in the cold. Adi begins as a beloved husband and doctor and becomes a haggard fanatic unable to even take care of himself. And Gus goes from an innocent little fawn in the woods to an elder and a new generation of flourishing survivors with a sense of innocence, love, and curiosity. Sweet Tooth is one of those stories that really tickles something in my brain. It's hopeful and earnest. It's easy to root for most of the characters because it's not necessarily that they're the good guys. It's just that they're normal. They're real. They just exist in a world and want to continue to exist in the world. I could go on and on about all the things I love that I notice on my billions of rewatches of this show, like the fact that Jet buys his way onto the train for Gus with a pair of fresh shoelaces, or that it makes sense that the first things that are going to go will be food and not boxed hair dye, so people will continue to have access to hair dye. I don't have the time to talk about every character I want to because this video will be 1 million years long. Having lived through a pandemic myself, I think about what the people I loved found the most important, and that was definitely relationships, and this show did such a good job of showing the people who blossom and survive are the ones that put value in other people and not in power. People who put value in power are the ones who start to topple everything. One thing I'm definitely going to discuss in the future is something that will be a little bit different from my usual discussions about costumes. I'm working on a video talking about art and its ability to help us in the darkest of times. If you haven't watched this show, I'm sorry for the spoilers, but get to it because I'm going to talk about Sweet Tooth and this other post-apocalyptic show I love, Station 11. And I guess that means for now I need to stop rambling like I do in real life and just get to the next thing. Now to ask you, if you were in the animal army, which animal do you think best represents you? What would be the most important thing for you to preserve in a post-apocalyptic society? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you to my patrons for being amazing. I appreciate you and couldn't do this without you. And until next time, be fancy, be adventurous.
Hey, sorry, man. Are you okay?
Couldn't you see me? I'm